All right, let's get this started. Thank you all for joining this webinar on karate UI test automation reimagined. I'm Peter. I work for Intuit. I am a distinguished engineer. And 3 years back, I ended up creating this open source test automation framework, which is the subject of today's webinar. So it has been a very interesting 3-year journey. It is doing rather well, and I will give you some evidence to that effect. And for those of you on social media, please do note the Twitter handles. I have one, and there's one for the project as well, which is in fact a good way for you to keep up to date with releases and things like that. So with that, let me get into the slides. Okay, great. One thing is, we have a Q&A section in the options that you would see as an attendee. I'm going to take questions at the end. In fact, what I'm going to try to do is actually finish at least in half an hour so that we have at least 30 minutes or 20 minutes to that effect for questions. The chat would be enabled when the questions start. I don't think the chat is enabled right now, but for those of you who want to ask questions, use the Q&A section and make sure that you vote up the questions that you want to be seen, because I see a lot of participants today. Again, thank you all for joining and taking the time. I hope this is going to be useful and worth it. I'll do my best. And with that, Intuit has a bunch of open source projects. In fact, quickly, I can show you that we have an open source presence. There's a website, opensource.intuit.com. And karate, you see here, is one of the projects on GitHub. It is doing rather well, almost 3,000 plus stars. So again, one nice thing that you could do today for the project and help us a little more with visibility is to add a star if you like what you hear today. All right, so it was released 3 years back. The term DSL stands for domain specific language. In case you don't know, I'll explain what I mean by that in a moment. And some of you, I'm sure, have encountered Cucumber. So karate would look a little bit like Cucumber, but it is very different. I want to make that clear because that's a very common misconception. So, just keep that in mind. And BDD, for those who don't know, it stands for behavior driven development. That's a Cucumber thing. If you haven't heard about it, don't worry. Karate just happens to reuse some of the look and feel of that approach. And yes, karate started out as an API testing tool. But very interestingly, as I said, in a span of almost 3 years, it has actually expanded to do all these things, including test doubles, performance testing. And the focus of today's session would be UI automation. So I'm going to spend at least 10 to 15 minutes on that. But I'll start by grounding you in some of the fundamentals of karate. That's what I'm going to do next. I know that there's a whole range of folks attending today. Some of you are actually fresh out of college, but some of you are experienced. So I'm trying my best to do justice to this. But as I said, again, use the Q&A time to actually ask me to go deep into some areas that you want me to go. Is karate doing well? There's a lot of evidence to that effect. Just one data point, we have ThoughtWorks, very reputed. They have this tech radar that they release on a quarterly or a biannual basis. Karate has got the unique distinction of appearing twice. We reappeared very recently in May, but can be moved closer to the center of that, the target thing that you see, which is a good sign. So who knows, maybe next year we would be actually right in the middle, where we are recommended to be adopted as something you should use on a day-to-day basis. All right, so a little bit of context before I get into API testing, which is what I'm going to start with first. A lot of you may not have been using the web back in 2005 timeframe. At that time, Google Mail had just come up, Gmail. There was something called Google Maps. And what happened was, in the old days, before I built that, websites were very simple. You click a button or click a hyperlink and the entire HTML page would refresh, go to the server, and then you get a new page back. But Gmail and Gmaps, Google Maps changed this, and things have never been the same. Most of you know the term Ajax. And what happens is that you can see that the user experiences start changing sections of the page. You basically take a div and you then replace it, and HTML is dynamically replaced and all that. And what is happening on the server? Again, on this slide, giving you a contrast. In the old days, people talked about MVC, HTML is generated on the server and rendered back to the browser. The browser does nothing but show HTML. But today, all of you know that the browser has kind of become a thick client. You have this load of JavaScript, it's React or Angular, or whatever the framework, the JavaScript framework of choice is for your particular situation. You have services, and all of you know today is all about services, and this is where Karate comes in, as you will see in a moment. The browser makes requests, gets pure data back as JSON, and renders it, right? And to put things in perspective, where does Karate fit in this whole picture? And keep in mind, what you see on the left, the HTML and JavaScript combination is actually responsible for the experiences that you see in probably 100% of the web. Email, shopping carts, Flipkart, Amazon, right? Everything is driven by services, and what Karate allows you to do is make calls to the services, validate that the data is as expected, and that, as you can imagine, is super important, right? So let's get into code. Hello world. The first thing that should strike you about this code is it's not any programming language that you're used to. It's not Java, it's not C#, it's not Ruby or JavaScript or Python. It's something weird. Well, that's Karate, and there are reasons for the design, as you will see. Those of you who know Cucumber would recognize the left-hand side, the leftmost word, given, when, then, that pattern of expressing tests. And JSON, and remember I talked a lot about JSON. JSON is pretty much the language of data on the web. Karate allows you to express JSON natively. If you notice, we don't need double quotes. And some of you know that if you have to express JSON in Java, sometimes you have to put backslash, double quote. You don't even need a double quotes here, see, right? You don't need quotes around the name, which is the key. And in the data side, you just need single quotes. And by the way, this is what JavaScript programmers are used to. And that's why people love JavaScript, right? So Karate gives you some of those advantages. DSL, I talked about being a domain specific language, which means that you express in 1 or 2 words a lot of things that you would do in typical programming languages. One thing I want to call your attention to is look at the second word on each slide. You see URL, you see request, you see method, status, and path. And these terms should make immediate sense to anyone who's worked in the world of HTTP or REST. Straight away makes sense. And this is one of the big deals when you are testing web services, right? Your responsibility is that you get a lot of data back from the server, and you need to go through all the data elements and validate that they are as expected. And that's exactly what Karate allows you to do. And in fact, you see some interesting tricks here, right? Look at that hash not null. This is a big pain point that you have when you test web services, because most of the time, actually, the data is unpredictable. You have UUIDs, you have date, time stamps, and random values. But Karate allows you, as you see here, you can validate all the data except 1 or 2 of these troublesome fields where you could use hash not null and things like that. And last but not the least, you never just hit one endpoint, do a get or a post and stop there. You would typically, and all of you know, you most likely be making a call to some authentication service, get some token, and then reuse that token on all requests. And Karate, as you see here, even though this is a simple test, it's actually doing 2 requests. And the last 3 lines is actually making a get, where the first part of the test was doing a post, and we reused the ID that came back in the response. Okay. Let me do a demo, right? Enough of talk, and I'm going to switch to Visual Studio Code, right? So if one of the questions was, how does Karate look like when you actually run tests? This is one example. By the way, I will show you IntelliJ later. So if you are someone who does a lot of Java, you'd be interested in that. And this test, as you can imagine, we're going to make a test to this public, kind of a test endpoint. We're going to post this payload, and you know what? Let me run this. And here's the great thing, right? One thing I want to call out specifically here that karate is designed so that even if you're not that good at programming or you don't use Java much, it doesn't matter. Install Visual Studio Code. I'm actually using a plugin which is called the Karate Runner plugin. It's contributed by someone I've never met, but Kirk has done a great job bringing it to this point. And this is an example of the magic of open source in the community and all that. And if you see the test, you can see the nice coloring and all that you get. I'll run this straight away. It's going to make a request to the cloud somewhere. And if I scroll back, you can see that this was the request that was made, a post. We got to 200 status. As you see the header and you see all the data back. And we actually validated that this chunk in the response was as expected. Let me show you the reports. That's very important because reports are very important for you to communicate to all the stakeholders, obviously. So Karate has got some pretty good reports. And one of the nicest things is you can see the HTTP logs inline in the report. People love this. You get to see this even if you run tests in parallel, which not many tools do. So one of the things you should ask when you choose a tool is, can it do reports? And can you run tests in parallel and still get the same reports? And surprisingly, a lot of tools don't support that. So hopefully you got a feel of what a karate test looks like, how simple it is, and the fact that you don't need, that you have IDE support, and that you don't need to be, a ultra experienced programmer. It's quite simple. And I think that's one of the reasons why it has actually done rather well. Now, I have a feeling a lot of you won't be really fans of Java. So you're going to love this slide. And, and don't get me wrong, I have to make this statement all the time, which is I am a hardcore Java programmer. I have a lot of experience in Java, but the point of the slide is that Java is not the right or not the best fit for things that you want to do in the world of API or JSON testing. So let me start by showing you this piece of data. It's pure JSON. And one of the nice things about JSON is you just put a curly brace and you're in pure data, right? There's no mess, but if you had to express this, what you see right now in Java, you would need all these lines of code. And yes, Java is not known to be the most concise of languages, and we are still not done, right? We need to actually say new cat and call all the setter methods. And only then would you actually arrive at this beautiful, elegant representation of data, which is JSON, right? And now what I've built on the slide is actually a valid Karate assertion. We are saying that, hey, this variable, and you can see Karate has a way in which you can declare variables. In this case, the variable is JSON. I'll also give you a small shortcut, which I like telling people. Whenever you see a curly brace, you should think in your mind it's an object. And whenever you see a square bracket, it means array, right? So what we're doing here is that we are validating whether the kitten's key value contains, which happens to be an array, contains this object, curly brace. This is surprisingly not that easy to do, right, in the Java world. And I'm showing you some code. It's actually very dirty because I have hard-coded 42 and while. So let me make this enterprise-friendly code where it has got, method arguments passed in, which are dynamic and you can reuse and all that. But you see the consequences of Java. You have to put null checks all over the place. You have to iterate over collections, and I'm sure there are bugs in this code, right? And what if you had to do something like this? This is again a valid piece of Karate where you're saying, hey, I want to find any kitten where the ID is greater than 25 and the name just has to be a string, which is an interesting data type validation. And this just works. I'm not even going to bother showing you the code for that. So why did I show you this slide? The reason is a lot of projects today, and this was the case in Intuit 3 years back before we introduced Karate. A lot of projects would be either writing homegrown frameworks using the Apache HTTP client, and then writing a lot of domain objects or POJOs or DTOs, whatever you want to call it. Some teams use rest assured, and the reason this approach where Karate does not need you to write all this Java code, which is troublesome and error prone, and this is a huge advantage. So you're actually almost similar to how your real consumers, if you think about who's consuming your web services, they are typically end users using web browsers. And Karate very much replicates that without you needing to write a lot of Java code, and people love this. If you're worried about reuse, you can take JSON from the file system. You can have them side by side with your feature files. By the way, you see this triple quote system here, which means that you can, if you want, embed a lot of JSON in your test itself, but you can read them from files, is what I wanted to mention. So I will not go through this in detail. And again, Karate's documentation, you should really check it out. There's a lot of work that's gone into making it very comprehensive. People love it a lot. But you can see, you've already seen not null, you've seen string, and Karate has a whole lot of helper, expressions to do the testing that you need to do all the time. So I'm just showing you a few extra ways of doing assertions. The star is interesting. There's something called JSON path, and this is not normal JavaScript, but Karate supports this natively, which allows you to do these interesting things like extract only some values. In this case, we're just asking the question, hey, just give me a bunch of IDs that happen to be in this JSON, and that's it. And the contains keyword is useful because it doesn't care about the order. And this is very common because most of the time when you're working with real life web services, the order cannot be guaranteed. The double dot is one of my favorite things because it doesn't care about the depth of the JSON fields, just works. And a few more assertions before I just get straight into, I know a lot of you want to see the UI automation part, so I'll get to that in a minute. You can do data type validations, regex, very useful in some circumstances. And the last two lines here are very interesting. The line that you see right now, it's a function, it's actually a JavaScript function. And this is a very interesting thing and one of the highlights of Karate, where you can actually mix a lot of business logic if you really wanted to into your test and reuse them. And you can see this is an example of reusing that function that we declared, which is called is less than 50. And some teams love this a lot because you can obviously think of situations where you have to reuse a lot of these conditional checks. One more piece of Karate fundamentals before I get into the really exciting stuff. I'll do a demo of API testing. I'll talk a little bit about performance testing, and then the last section of my presentation will be all about UI automation testing. But for some of you who are experienced veterans, right, who want to go beyond the stuff that Karate gives you, what I've already shown you, I just want to call out that Karate gives you this very elegant, seamless way to talk to Java code. It can be custom Java code. In this example, dbutils happens to be some Java code that is able to talk to a RDBMS, make a database JDBC connection. By the way, note we are actually calling the constructor of a Java object here. So it just took 2 lines to set up Karate's communication with Java. And at the end, because Karate is so good at JSON, right? And there's one more principle that happens here. When data goes from Karate into Java, a JSON gets translated to a hash map and vice versa, which is amazing because all you need to do is ensure that your Java code, in this case, read rows, return a list of hash maps actually, because it's an array. And guess what? The moment it is an array, dogs is, in this case, a variable which is a JSON array. You're straight away able to do all the nice stuff that I talked about earlier, which is match and contains. And what this test does in 6 lines of code, actually 5 lines of code, is it opened a connection to a database, fired an SQL query, that's the second last line, actually iterated over the result set and actually compared whether any of the results was what we wanted to expect. And here, see that ID is actually being parameterized. So you can imagine that ID was something that happened in the earlier part of the test, and we're just doing maybe we did a post there, and then we are able to validate it. So the takeaway here is that Karate can mix with Java so well. And one of the things you're going to see in a moment is Karate will take that and run performance tests, which is a very interesting combination. Again, not many other open source tools have that capability. It's something you would want to consider using, I'm sure. I will show you quickly what Karate looks like in a real life scenario when you have a lot of tests. And I'm going quickly to the Karate demo. This is, by the way, part of the GitHub project. It has 2 purposes. It serves as a regression test for Karate, which is important because you need to have a test for your testing framework, right? And let me run this test, which is actually going to run this whole bunch of tests in parallel, right? And the second purpose for these tests is to act as reference for people who want to see what all karate can do. And it has a whole bunch of scenarios and different kinds of real life troublesome situations that you want to test. And it's stuck here. By the way, I'm having some network issues at home, so I figured out just before this presentation that some of my demos are going to hang for 30 seconds. I have no idea why this is happening, but I've seen this in the past, so I'm kind of expecting it. So let's wait for this to, I think we've got about 15 more seconds, and maybe this is a good time for me to look at the questions. Motive, cucumber, wow, okay. Okay, I got a sense of the question. I think one of the questions is, can you pick up values from an Excel file? And the answer is yes. So I'll show you some examples of that. And obviously my demo has kind of hung here, which is not good, obviously. I'll just give it, okay, there it is. Yeah, so it's running a whole bunch of tests. It's of course started up a fake server. And I'll show you the reports, because the reports are the most important part, right? What you want to get out of your reports is as easy as possible. It should be as easy as possible for you to see if something failed and why it failed and all that. So this is still hanging in a kind of unusual way. So I think the reason why it's hanging now extra bad is because I am connected to Zoom, which tends to do that. Okay, I'm so thankful. So I'm not going to do the second part of this demo, which is to rerun this with a test failure. But let me show you the report. Dot karate demo. You come by HTML reports. This is what the reports look like. So give me a moment. Where am I? Okay, yeah, I knew I was in the wrong place. So these reports are great. And by the way, I'm going to skip the demo where I attempt to actually create a failure. And if something fails, you'll very immediately see it colored in red over here. You can just get into what failed. You can even sort this column. So let me, so for example, if this feature failed, you would see, and of course, I'm just reminding you that you can actually see the HTTP logs in line. If something failed, you'd see something big and red, and you would see a lot of extra data as to what was expected, what was actual, and some helpful logs. And karate is quite good at that. It's evolved obviously over a long period of time. So the point here is that, hey, karate fits straight away. It's just like running JUnit in Maven. For those of you who are experienced with that, it would fit and interoperate with any continuous integration server or pipeline that you have, like Jenkins, Travis, and whatnot. And so that's good news, I'm sure, for those of you who are thinking of using karate. All right, so the next couple of minutes, I'll just talk through performance testing. I won't do a demo. I just want to make sure that you are aware of this, because it's a very unique capability that I don't think any other open source project has. Now, how do you do performance testing today? I'm sure most of you, you have this team, you probably already have a bunch of very nice functional regression tests, right? And one day, maybe just a couple of weeks before going to production, someone comes running to you in a panic and says, we haven't done performance testing and we need to do it right now, like yesterday. And then there's a mad scramble, right? You call in some specialist or some SWAT teams that you have. And these are experts in Gatling or JMeter. And you have to take all your scenarios that you already have and rewrite them. And that's what the red part of the slide signifies, that you need to rewrite all these flows in yet another tool, run that tool, and then you get your performance testing results. But what if, I've always wondered this, and I'm so thrilled that I was able to actually translate this into reality. What if you could take your existing functional tests and just add a load model, and a load model is nothing but a multiplication factor. Take this script and multiply it by 100 or 1,000 users, and then run this, and that is what Karate allows you to do. People love this feature. It's a big hit, as you can imagine, because it saves a huge amount of time, and it's something I really want you to check out. If there is time at the end, I will do this demo. So I will skip through to the most important part of this presentation. I hopefully set the ground that Karate started out as an AI testing tool. It has all the things you would expect, especially a JavaScript engine, which is one of the secret sauce kind of things. We have mocking. I have not gone into mocking because it's really an advanced subject, but if you, and I'm sure this is going to resonate with a lot of you folks, if you have to depend on a lot of services that you don't own, but you need for your integration testing, excuse me, Karate gives you a way to actually simulate them locally on your local host, especially useful when that service is in development or it's very flaky, or it's unreliable, bad versioning and all that. So super useful. I'll try to show you a demo of how mocks can be used in UI automation testing, which is very interesting. So let's hope I get time for that. Gatling is something I just showed you. Again, I'm skipping through the demo and the last part of the slide. And you can see at the top, there's this very interesting journey that I honestly, personally never expected to happen. It's just gone great. I think a lot of things have clicked. There's been a little bit of luck, maybe, or a little bit of my experience that has just come out at the right moment or something. But where we are at the end of the slide, the rightmost part is UI automation. So, and yes, let me say it out loud, right? This is competing with Selenium, which is, as you know, the king of web automation frameworks, been around for a long time. And I felt that maybe, there can be a better alternative. There's time for a new contender. There's a lot. There are a lot of commercial tools, which I will not name right now. I'm sure all of you know what you have a few at the top of your mind. There's something very unique about Karate's support for UI automation. If you look closely at the right bottom part, you can see that we support Chrome directly. And this is exactly the same kind of technology that Puppeteer uses, if you have heard of it. I'm sure a lot of you have heard of Puppeteer. It's very popular as a way to script or automate Chrome. But we can take your existing test case and just by switching configuration, you can switch it to W3C WebDriver. And W3C WebDriver is just another name for the Selenium family of technologies that allow you to do cross-browser testing. So what this means, you can focus most of your effort on Chrome in your development, but then you can switch to Firefox or Internet Explorer and it will just work. Again, a very unique thing that not many tools do. So, one reason for you to check out Karate. This is going to be a busy slide, so I'm going to go through this in 2 minutes. And just to for those of you who are very new to automation in general or very new to the industry, some of this won't make sense. But I think some of you on this call who have experience with Selenium or any kind of web automation testing, it hopefully makes sense. So let me get this out of the way before I start doing demos. Okay. All right. So if you had time to look at it, let me call out the highlights. Yes, it's concise. By the way, the given and when is maybe overkill. So if you don't like it, you can just replace all the red parts on the slide with just star. You would have probably seen it in some of the code examples. CSS locators, you can also use XPaths. And there's one more proprietary Karate specialization that you see on the have a domain specific language. You can see the methods are so nicely designed to wait for URL, which reminds me, waiting for things is one of the hardest problems in web automation, which is something we tried our really level best to get right in Karate. I invite you to go to documentation and look at it. I'll also show you, I'll actually going to recommend a link that's going to come up in a moment. So please note that down and go through an article that I have put all my thoughts and rationale for why we designed some of this the way that it looks here on this slide. This is the friendly wildcard locators that you have. That A happens to represent a hyperlink. The A is optional. You can just have that pair of curly braces. what this family of locators, which is there in karate, what this allows you to do is that without looking at the view source, you can actually write tests, because what that find file is, it's actually the human readable, the visible text on the page. So we use that as a basis for doing location. We can wait for an element, and here we're not only waiting for an element, but we are actually assigning it to a variable using the def keyword, which is going to be important in a moment. So hang on. And the last line is an assertion. I think by now I've made the case that karate is really, really good at assertions, especially JSON assertions and string assertions, which is what you would typically need in UI automation, are like a piece of cake for karate. So what will a real life test look like? And this particular test, it actually does something very complicated. It actually goes to the karate GitHub page. It goes to the search option. It types something into a search box. It waits until the results that come back from the search. And all this is Ajax, and it's highly dynamic, JavaScript flavored HTML user experience. So we have to wait for all these things to happen. Even though it sounds simple, it's actually a very complicated test to pull off. And by the way, this is kind of the long form of the test that I'm showing you. Karate has some special helpers that even can compress all the lines that you see at the bottom of the slide into 3 lines. But let me explain some of the interesting things happening here. We can do method chaining. Remember, we assigned an element to a variable. We can now take that variable and call methods using dot on it. And this can be super readable as well as super expressive in many ways. One of the things I really don't like about Selenium and many of the other frameworks is that in order to inject or to execute JavaScript in the HTML page or against the DOM, you need to do a lot of roundabout things like setting up a JavaScript executor and whatnot. We have made that dead simple. In fact, there's a very interesting shortcut here. At runtime, that underscore gets replaced or injected with the actual element reference in JavaScript terms, the node, and it just works, and it's super convenient actually. And I've just lost my mouse and I've just got it back. All right, so, and you can see functions. Karate is all about JavaScript functions that you can declare, which is a very useful thing. Once you get your head around JavaScript, in case you're new to JavaScript, it is super useful because it can pass functions all around, like you see in this example, and then reuse them. Karate allows you to do that. Again, not many frameworks have that degree of flexibility or power. And one thing I like, again, if I were to compare karate with a lot of the JavaScript flavored UI testing frameworks, it ends up that you need to be very good at JavaScript. You need to understand concepts like await and promises and all that. You don't with karate. We've kept it that we've taken care of all that stuff behind the scenes. You just write sequential steps like this. You can mix in some functions, but everything kind of works exactly the way that you see the sequence here. I mean, it works as you expect. You can see we have the inner text function is calling, we define inner text here. What it's going to do is scrape the inner text out of an HTML table because it's going to run it on all the locators that matched. Maybe this is getting really complicated, but at the end of this, right, I've taken a slightly complicated example because many times when you interact and you're trying to do testing again as a UI, right, you have HTML tables or repeated elements and you want to get all the data out and then run validations on them. And, this is an example of a test that does that. Finally, the second last line is a user-defined wait, right? We defined a search function and Karate has a rule that until it returns, wait until it's designed so that as long as it returns null, it keeps polling. There's a way in which you can set the poll time, by the way. And once you get the result back, it actually assigns that result to as the return type to that method. And then you can use that using, again, contains is one of the assertions in karate that I talked about right at the start of this presentation. It all comes together. It may look a little complicated, but guess what? What I've learned the hard way, to be very honest, is web automation is a really, really hard area. Okay, and with a lot of pain, to be honest, that we've got this together. And I'm sure that a lot of you who try this out are going to appreciate it and understand why it looks the way it is. What I'm going to do right now is run a test with Chrome. And again, this is something I noticed. It's going to hang here for 30 seconds. So again, let me, and I have to make this clear. This hanging here for 30 seconds never happens. It's just because today I'm a different network and I'm using Zoom. Right, so what does this test do? It's supposed to navigate to the GitHub page, attempt to log in. I'll show you the test in a moment, and then I'll try to do a debug. There it is. It failed the login. It asserted the error message. Yeah, that's quite fast. It actually went and did a Google search for karate, which is here on this line. And then it just checked, hey, are we on the karate homepage? And then that's the end of the test, right? I want to show you something which is super exciting to me. It's one of the new things we have. Some of you know this already, that we have first-class debug support. And again, there's a little bit of technical issue here on my machine where this debug server, normally it starts right away. I'm going to wait for it to start. I'm just going to scan through the questions. Okay, thanks. I can see some helpful folks actually answering some of the questions, so thank you very much. Yeah. The debug server is yet to start. The questions are kind of all over the place. Okay, so I'm trying to gather my thoughts and see how I can. Yeah, that's great. Obviously that failed. So let's try this again. Okay, this should work. It hangs at this line. So in case someone is a network wizard and understands what on earth is going on my machine, please send me a message offline so I can fix this at some point. All right, so can variables methods defined in a scenario be accessed in another scenario? Looks like you've used karate, so I'm starting to read out the questions, okay? The answer is no, because scenarios are designed to be standalone. I have a lot of lecturing I've done, and I think this is a question that comes up a lot of the time. Okay, by the way, the debug test starts, so Chrome has started out. What I'm showing you here is that karate has stopped at this breakpoint. Right, line number 14, we actually had a breakpoint red dot, and this is something that not many tools support today, which is you have Chrome that is up, a test has started, but you have actually frozen a test in time. Let me move some of these things around like this. And now the interesting thing is that since everything is frozen, you can do all the nice things you want to do as a developer. And all of you who have experience with web testing know that this is super useful, being able to actually inspect the HTML and view source and all that. So you can do that, which is a great thing. And just trying to get used to the Zoom stuff getting in my way. If I go to the debug console, I can do things like highlight, interact with the page while it's up there. So we know that login field is the ID of the login. So watch, as soon as I hit enter, you see it getting highlighted on the right. Again, this is very useful. You can do highlight all buttons and it'll all just work. But here's the best part, right? What I'm going to do is actually step back, and I have to say not do in normal programming languages. You can't step back and replay stuff in Java, Ruby, Python, JavaScript. So that's a pretty cool thing. So and it gets better. So what I'm going to do after I figure out how to move the Zoom toolbar away is start replaying steps, and I can actually edit this. Hit this green button to hot reload it, and when I play that, I should see that entered over here on the right. And that's a great time for a phone call. So the point here is that this is super cool, right? I was able to edit a test without restarting it and going all the way back, which is the biggest pain point you have in UI automation, right? I think all of you have felt that pain. Something is broken at the end of your test. You need to just restart everything, including login, and waste a lot of time. And karate with this debug capability, I think, is in a very good place. and you should probably check it out for just this one reason. In my experience, I use this debugging all the time. I can't live without it. It saves a huge amount of time. It's really one reason why you should look at this. I can also show a quick demo Gecko driver of just changing the config, and this time the test should run with Firefox. So let's see if that works. Fortunately, that doesn't suffer from the whole waiting experience. Okay, so I did not expect this, but you get the point, right? On a normal day, when my machine and my home network works, you can take the same test, run this against Firefox, and it'll just work. I'm now so scared. I had a Docker test running, but I can probably be brave enough to see if one of my Docker demos works. And the reason Docker is important is that all this working on the local machine is well and good, but finally you need to run your UI automation test on CI/CD mode. That's where Docker comes in. And if I show you a particular test that I plan to run. Right, so this is a test that has 3 scenarios in it. They are independent, and we have set things up so that they actually run in parallel. I'll also open the command line window to see if Docker is up. So there are no processes running. But when I run this test in parallel, what you're about to see is you will actually see three separate Docker containers come up. So you're actually going to run tests in parallel. There you go, 3 containers have come up. And this is great because I can continue to do my work on my local machine, all the heavy lifting of browsers, and these are real browsers, not headless. It's all happening in the background. And ultimately, Karate should, it's waiting for one troublesome container to still, okay, there we are, the tests are over. And let me show you one of the nice things about this report. Is something did fail. And by the way, so if you wanted an example of what a test failure looks like, there it is. But one of the best things, in fact, let's do one thing, right? One of the killer features of our Docker integration is when a test report comes back, you get a video. So we should be actually able to see what on earth happened that this failed. So far, so good. There you go. See, I think this demo turned out to be better than I expected, to be very honest. So what's the takeaway? Karate supports Docker. We have a Docker container. Go to the documentation, look it up. You can actually, without any extra infrastructure, run your tests in parallel. If you have Docker locally, which is what I did, you saw an example of 3 tests run and 2 that passed and 1 that failed. They all ran in parallel, which is pretty cool, to be honest, or in my very biased opinion. So I said that I would give you this link that you should go and check out. I can paste it, or I think if you do a search for, can I paste it into the chat window? I can just try that experiment very quickly. I assume that I have, what do you say? I have permissions to chat or not. Hang on a second. To send all panelists and attendees. Hang on, just trying to figure out Zoom. So I've sent a link. So those of you who are interested, I won't spend time on this. I've put down my thoughts onto why Karate has been designed and all the specific things that we took care to make this better than the competition. So please do check it out, especially those of you who are been working in test automation for a long time. You should really check this out. So let's recap, right? We saw that Karate does API testing, but what has happened now is that we have actually put Karate at this layer where it can actually do front-end testing, right? And who would have thought that? I never thought that in the early days. And speaking of Karate mocks, let me show you one more demo, and I'm going to just try this, right? If it doesn't work quickly, I will abandon it. But what I wanted to show you, and at least show you the code of what's supposed to happen, is Karate has again unique feature where you can mock, let's assume you're testing against Chrome. And if you know that your web page, when you're testing a UI, when you're running a UI test against a web page, you know that that web page is going to make a request to some server. You can actually fake that response. And it's very easy to do. This is what it looks like. So yeah, by the way, for those of you who are using Karate, there's a secret stop option where the Karate would stop at a certain point. Hopefully what I'm doing here will become obvious in a moment. That's good. Chrome started, but it's probably going to take time to just connect to the web page. So again, let me do that waiting game and look at the questions. Yeah, I think I answered the question on scenarios. So answered. And testing in cloud, I think I answered that. Docker is the answer. Okay. Okay, great. So the page came up, and thanks to my network issues. And if I go to the IDE, you'd see that the test are actually paused at a point. I'll try to do both. And I'm going to explain what happens, right? In real life, this page is supposed to go to the internet and get some picture, a JPEG from a database. But what I've done is actually faking this. There's a JPEG here of this cat, kind of a famous cat. So what we have done is we have set up things so that when a request comes for that, for an image, we're going to fake and send back this cat's picture image instead. All that logic is in mock01.feature. If I open mock01.feature, it's very simple. Again, if you're interested in this, look at the documentation, but this is a very simple mock that is saying that, hey, if a request comes back for an image, if an incoming request comes for an image from Chrome, in this case, send back this response, and by default, return this JSON. By the way, this is an example of returning JSON from the file system. So how does this look? If I click get new user, it's going to give me back this cat. And every time I click, it's going to give me back the cat, but I've incremented this counter by 2 because that's the logic that I wrote in the mock. So this is an example. We have mixed everything, right? We have mixed Karate for UI testing with Chrome, and we have mixed Karate mock. And it just comes together in this amazing combination, which I think is super useful and gives you probably some interesting options to think through for your future automation testing. So we have time for questions, which is great. We have definitely 10 minutes. And I just want to end on the slide, and I'll start taking questions right now. All the blue boxes here, and some of you testing experts and veterans would recognize the testing pyramid on the right. So Karate did start out only in the middle, doing just API testing, but we have gradually, gone into very interesting areas. And these are the questions you should ask when you choose a test automation tool. The question you should ask, does it do all these things, right? Or do you need to have to mix and match all these things? And some people like to mix and match, but I personally don't agree that that's a good use of your time. I've been not struggling, it's been fun, but I have spent a lot of hard work over the last 3 years trying to put all these boxes together that they work. It's something I don't feel you should redo. Don't reinvent the wheel. So, this is one of the reasons, and this is obviously part of my marketing pitch here, to get you to try out Karate at least. Okay. How do you validate? So with that, thank you very much. And again, here's a reminder of the web page and all that. I'm just looking at some instructions. So we are now going to get into the Q&A section. And one of the things that may work now is that we can also open it up for chat. So if we can try that, but let me focus on the Q&A. And by the way, you would see all attendees, you should see a poll that should show up now somewhere on your screen. Please do fill this out. It's going to help us decide how to change this content in the future or to do more of these things. And thank you so much for all of you who are, I can see all the responses coming in and it looks great. Q&A, how do you validate two same property names but at different level? That's easy. Again, there is a lot of things in Karate that allow you to do that. So if I, I'm also giving you a feel of how the documentation looks. And in fact, very interestingly, one of the feedback, common complaints I get nowadays is that there is too much documentation, which is awesome. I don't think I'm going to change that very soon. So match, there's a whole section on how you do comparisons. This just goes on and on. By the way, I didn't mention it, but Karate supports XML. So in case you have some legacy systems, again, very few tools support both JSON and XML. Okay. I see a comment, JavaScript makes more sense. Absolutely. I'll leave it at that. Can we compare Karate with Java JUnit? Totally different. You don't even need JUnit at all. And if you do a little search, and I don't have the link handy, or maybe I have so Karate is integration testing. It does API testing. It's a level above unit testing. So I leave it at that. It's a little more nuanced than that. You can use Karate for JUnit kind of assertions. And maybe I'll show you a quick slide and leave it up on the screen. And if I can remember which backup slide that is, with this one. Yeah, this is an example of Karate for unit testing. So you can take a screenshot if you want and try to go through this. I'm not going to explain all of this, but it's there in various forms on the internet or on Twitter, I think, if you do a little search. Okay. I call your attention to the bottom right of the slide. That is data-driven testing. This also answers one of the questions I got earlier about, can you do CSV or tabular data? That's data-driven testing for you. And one of the great things about Karate is that you can, instead of that table that you see at the bottom of the slide, bottom right, you can actually put a CSV file, read a CSV file, and it will just work. Pretty awesome. Again, not many tools do that. Someone has already answered, how does Karate stand out? Please don't ask me that because I'll be very biased. I'll say Karate is the best tool that you can ever hope to find, but I'm just take that with a pinch of salt, obviously. So, okay, thanks. How and why did you think of Karate when you said Cucumber similar? I mean, I think I've made the point that Cucumber is totally different. I'll say this, Cucumber, in the world of Cucumber, right, you're expected to have you should not write your code, your tests before the application has been written, right? Which means that you need to work with your business experts and your product managers and your users and all that, your end users, basically. Work with them, understand examples, type it out in plain English, and then translate that into text. Karate is nothing like that. Karate, if you see here, especially this slide, Karate is a programming language, right? It happens to be this interesting programming language that combines aspects of JavaScript and all the other things. So it's not Cucumber. Do not be confused. And sometimes it actually upsets me a lot when people say, hey, Karate is bad because I expected Cucumber things to be there. And that's such a totally, yeah, it doesn't make sense. Will a recording be available? I think so. I will, wait for instructions and confirm that. So how do I get rid of this question? Okay, thank you very much. My team, and thanks my team, Mahek and Kajal for setting this up, and Nandini, I think you folks have done an awesome job. And will recording answer live done? How do we handle SOAP web security in Karate? The short answer is that you would have to express it as plain text. But remember, I give you a little bit of theory that Karate can mix Java code. So what I know teams do is that they write this helper utilities as Java. You can also write it as JavaScript if that works for you. And then you just reuse that in the test. So that piece of Java code or that helper function that I was just talking about, assume in your mind that it is doing the hard work of figuring out what WS security, XML it has to form. You just add that to your XML response. There are many ways in Karate in which you can modify non or XML, and then you'll be up and running. The limitations of Karate frameworks. If you ask me, the only limitation that I can, say, talk about is, and to set expectations, is that you don't have strong typing. Karate is a dynamically typed language. You do have IDE support and you have the debug support that makes up for this limitation that I'm about to say, which is you don't have things like IntelliSense. You can put a dot, just like you have Java and IntelliJ, you don't have autocomplete and those kind of things. And some of the errors or typing mistakes that you make, you might find it only at runtime. That's a very natural thing for dynamic languages. But in my very honest opinion, the debugger that I showed you makes up for all of that and all the reports. So, typically I think the developer experience is as good as it possibly can be. And it's definitely on our roadmap. You saw that the Visual Studio Code is there already. One of the things, and this is a good opportunity for me to please, urge all of you who like what you've heard today to contribute to this project. This is definitely, one of the few, the rare Indian open source projects that is, doing rather well. So, it's one more reason for you to consider maybe contributing to this project. Why did I choose the name Karate? I happen to be this Japanese enthusiast for whatever reasons. And the honest answer is, I actually did a Google search. There was no other software called Karate, but today I'm very happy to say that Karate is even got a Wikipedia page. If you do a search for Karate, it probably comes in the 3rd page of Google results, and it's getting better. So it's certainly, it's certainly a better name than Cucumber. So I have that going for it. What is Cucumber? I think there's no time for me to answer that here. I think I did some explanation as to it's related to a concept called behavior-driven development. You can read about it on the net, so please do that. If value in JSON has a quote, easy, you use double quotes. So that's simple. And of course, all the escaping, syntax that you imagine, you can use backslash and escape quotes. And finally, there are at least 3 or 4 ways I have in my mind where you can solve this. So quotes, the answer is backslash. Which coding languages is everything's going above your head? Yes, I think I made that clear at the start. This is not Java, not JavaScript. But if you look here on the right-hand side of the screen that I have in front of you right now, it's a language that's designed to do data manipulation and data assertions. And this is a big deal. It may not make sense if you're not interested in testing, but if you are someone who has a responsibility in your daily job to actually do a lot of testing, you know what? You're going to love Karate. What do you think about TACT? I think it's over-engineered, to be very honest, right? Again, I didn't have time for that, but Karate has a whole section on contract-driven testing. Maybe I can show you that slide very quickly. If you look up, there's one of my YouTube videos that gives you a 10-minute lecture on this slide that I'm going to build. And you know what? Karate is a contract-driven, consumer-driven contract testing framework, at its core. That's because it combines the best of mocks and API testing. So I unfortunately don't have time, but I'm showing you the slide to hopefully prove my point that we have put a lot of thought into doing something. So my short answer is whatever you can do in TACT, you can do it in Karate, but in maybe 1/10 the lines of code and complexity and steps and all that. You don't have a broker, which is controversial because I personally feel you don't need a broker because, if you're in the same organization, which is 90% the case, you don't need Git. Is more than sufficient to share code, in my opinion. And I'm just trying to find my way back to the Q&A. How I think I've just 1 more minute. So thanks for those who voted the questions. I think that helped. Answered the JUnit question. I answered the contract-driven testing. Karate in a live server, that's not a normal use case because Karate runs as testing. Yeah, I see some good, thank you for the nice feedback. Memory utilization, I think, you can try this exercise for yourself. I will just say here that from not really doing so much of benchmarking, and honestly, it doesn't really matter. If your testing tool works and if your testing tool is fast, memory should be the least of your concerns. And having been someone who's really spent so much time on UI automation, man, there are so many challenges that are top of the mind, and memory is the last. Okay, so with that, wow, I think I answered all the questions. So that is extremely great. For those of you who still haven't answered the poll question on the rating and the feedback, please do so. And with that, thank you so much for sticking with me for an hour and going through this session. It was great fun, and I hope I see all of you come forward and contribute maybe. Thank you very much.